about her escape called Unorthodox. It's a fascinating.
So this is the woman who wrote the book that the Netflix series that everyone is buzzing about on Orthodox. So let's listen. I just want to look at a critical eye at Deborah Feldman. Looks very different than the actress that plays her.
Story, all the more so because she now finds herself living right here in the German capital, Berlin. Deborah Feldman, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Lovely. And thank you very much as well for being with us on the interview here on DW.
Okay.
Now, Deborah, I'd like to begin by asking you to describe, if you would, for us, the strictly observant community that you grew up in and that you then rejected.
Okay, so the community I grew up in New York was founded by Holocaust survivors, mostly Hungarian Holocaust survivors, who believed that the Holocaust had been a punishment for assimilation and for Zionism. And they designed a sort of new ghetto in the middle of New York City. And they believed that the only way to prevent another punishment, another Holocaust from happening, was to develop a lifestyle that was stricter than any Jewish lifestyle that had been lived before. And every single rule that they designed was like an extreme interpretation of a Jewish law.
So it's really important when people see Orthodox, they think that all the Orthodox Jews are like that. There are other sects like Gur, our health minister, the Israeli health minister is from that sect. And they are very extreme as well. I've read books and I've read tragic stories of women that attempted to escape. Some of them had to give up their kids. Their husbands managed to get the kids out away from them. But let me just say, I just read yesterday of a case of an Israeli woman who lost her daughter in an Israeli court. Not religious at all, just because of this tendency these days to give men an equal opportunity. Even though the baby is only 2 years old and the woman didn't want to live in California, he got a job in California. Two Israeli Jews, not religious as far as I know. She wanted to be in Israel. She didn't want to follow her husband and she wanted a divorce because she brought the child with her. It's called kidnapping. She lost custody. The man can go back to California, to the country that has the most coronavirus. That didn't help her, that argument. And she has to decide either she follows the husband she doesn't want to live with to California, or she loses contact with her 2-year-old daughter. And this has nothing to do with religion. So people, let's be real. The courts of law, not just in Israel, in a lot of countries, they're really making it difficult for women in a state of separation from husbands. So she was lucky she had a mother who helped her, but not everybody has that. So let's keep it real. As far as Orthodox Judaism, there's so many streams of Orthodox Judaism that do not practice such really extreme rules. Not allowing music. I don't know. Some of these things were just completely horrific. And not everyone, there are other extreme sects, not just this, what are they called again? I forgot what they're called. They're really like one of the most extreme. She will say the name again. These are a small minority. They're definitely not at all indicative of religious Jewish life. It's ultra Orthodox and they're very, very, very rigid people. So if you see that and you think, oh, this is what Jews are like, that could be a problem. There could be a misconception.
They lived this extreme interpretation because they believed that they were appeasing God by doing this and that God would have mercy on them, that he would quell his anger against the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm. The name of the community is the Satmar community.
Satmar.
Can you just explain for us where the name actually comes from?
The name comes from a town on the Hungarian-Romanian border, Satu Mare.
Yeah.
And it's called Satmar because it was named after the village from which the rabbi of our community came. But if you go back historically and you look at the Hasidic movement, which was a sort of mystical movement within Judaism that was, during its time, very rebellious and very anti-Orthodox, it was based in different towns and cities. And each town and city would have its own rabbi, and this rabbi would acquire a following, and the following would be named after the town. So when the surviving Hasidic members of these towns came to the US, they formed groups again and named themselves after the towns they had come from or the rabbis they had followed. And so my community was mostly Hungarian survivors who were following the rabbi who came from the town of Satu And he was a very radical person already before the war and became much more radical after the war.
So as you've explained, the community members grew up very much under the shadow of the Holocaust, as you did too. And I noted in one of your previous interviews, you said the following: "I cannot remember a moment when I was not aware of my identity as a descendant of Holocaust survivors." That's a very painful mindset.
It's not necessarily painful if that's all you know. It's simply a fact of life. What I meant to say with that is that I can't remember having like a consciousness and not being aware that the Holocaust happened. But that is not to say that I suffered very much every day from this knowledge. I think I can describe a kind of cumulative suffering that has come with me as I have grown up. And I have taken with me a lot of irrational fears from my childhood. But during that time, I didn't acknowledge it or experience it as suffering. I just experienced it as normal. I thought it was like this for everyone. And I loved the people who raised me very, very much. And the fact that they were survivors made me feel, of course, that my suffering could not compare to theirs. And since I loved them, I never wanted to complain about what I went through, because I only was aware of what they went through.
Yeah,
A very important aspect of how you grew up is that the
Second
Germans
generation.
were vilified and damned as being the perpetrators of the Holocaust. What was your understanding of what real Germans might have been like when you were growing up?
It wasn't just that they were vilified. It was that, again, the sort of mystical view of Hasidic people turned Germans into demons, so they weren't human anymore.
I think it has to do also with Talmudic interpretations, and it's not just Germans, it's other non-Jews. And it's funny because, in a way, this is how the Jews were viewed by the anti-Semites. And just to be fair, I mean, these are people that are not very much into education, and they do have a very different view of human beings and the division of roles, and it has to do with a very different mystic view of humanity. And I just think that, to be quite fair, I mean, they suffered a lot. So, yes, she suffered too. And I think what she's describing is something that second generation, third generation, actually, she's probably third generation Holocaust survivor, they suffer a lot because you hear all these stories. You grow up with this feeling guilty constantly that you need to please your grandparents or to be this perfect Jew, and I think that's really tough.
Demons sent by God to get us. And I remember my grandmother telling me things like Hitler had chicken feet, but he never took off his shoes so you wouldn't see. But if you took
That sounds like a primitive
traveling
person.
and meeting people in real life and like learning how to humanize people.
And my grandparents, can I just intervene here? My grandmother had all her family killed. She had a lot of siblings, 6 or 7, and their spouses and their kids. She also had a Hungarian connection. But the point is, she never spoke badly about Germans because they loved the culture, so they differentiated. These people lived in already a very small little community, secluded. But people like my grandmother, who was modern Orthodox, she had contact with culture. My grandfather loved Strauss. They loved classical music. They were open. They were religious, but they were very open to German culture. They read German newspapers. My grandmother read the Stern and all these German newspapers, magazines. She loved German culture. She loved German language. She loved German books. My mother always read German books, and had no problem with that. The opposite. They admired the German culture, and they differentiated between the Nazis and the Germans. But people that were anyway growing up in a small little village and were influenced by prejudices, they're not different than people that are like other people of other religions that live in small little villages and are not exposed to ideas, cultural, Western cultural ideas of philosophy, of history. They're not reading newspapers. They're not really involved in the culture around them. And so, of course, they began to develop like a sort of like a mystic, a sort of like, I don't know, weird kind of view of human beings in the war, and not realizing, not really looking into the circumstances and the political influences and the way people behaved and so forth. So these people are really a minority. There are many educated religious Jews that took it to another level. So yeah. And I never heard actually anyone speaking badly about Germans. There was a difference between Nazis and the Germans. Of course, they were not thrilled, and they were like, "No, oh, I want my grandkids to marry non-Jews." That did happen in our family. There was not a celebration when that happened, because practically means intermarriage means that the chances of your children um, be, forming a Jewish identity and becoming part of the Jewish uh, minority. There are only 14 million Jews in the whole entire world. The chances of your children becoming and their children becoming Jewish when you marry a non-Jew are very, very small. Just so you know, assimilation is a real threat to Judaism. So of course they didn't celebrate if you say you want to marry a non-Jew. Um, Very few Jews, that even the ones who are not religious, would be like thrilled about it. I mean, I know people that are secular, complete secular, and they would never think of marrying a non-Jew just because they identify as culturally Jew. So while this woman lived in New York, there's also Paul Auster. And when I read his book, 4321, when he talks about a Jewish epic story, there are Jews that are not religious, but it's very important for them to marry Jews because they want to celebrate the holidays together. They want to have that in common. They want to continue the heritage, and they know for sure that they work. They even work on Saturday. They don't keep the Sabbath. They don't keep a lot of religious rules. Actually, don't keep any religious rules, but they celebrate holidays, just like there are Christians who don't go to church and don't keep all these rules, but they celebrate Christmas and Easter, in a very cultural way and not really thinking too much about religion. So I think, let's be fair, there are all kinds of colors in that spectrum. And I think a lot of people who watch this very popular series might be tainted by this extreme.
I'd just like to go back to another important aspect of the Satmar community, that it was certainly a harsh environment, I think, for everybody involved, including men, but especially women.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a harsh environment because everything is fear driven. So you're living.
Yeah, it's true. It's really hard. But you know what? If I'm a little bit afraid that when people see this Netflix series, they start to look at Jews even more. Like, people asked me when I lived in Europe whether I have a wig. Why would I have a wig? First of all, I didn't lead a religious life, and I was weird. It was like weird. Do you have a wig? Do you keep a wig? And all kinds of weird stories go around Jews, and like we control the world. And there's like all this, if you go on YouTube, there's tons of videos about how the Jews control the world, how the Rothschild caused all the wars, and all kinds of conspiracy theories. Even now, coronavirus, I heard that in the US it's becoming quite a problem. So this woman has to be aware it's very important to tell her stories. It's really important, by the way, she really looks like that woman, Mayim Bialik. It's really important to keep it in context that most of the Jewish world, even the Orthodox world, is not extreme, does not shut out the other world, and does not mistreat women. But Satmar are well known for being an extreme cult. And just as there are extreme Muslims, extreme Christian, that also abuse women and children, and the more vulnerable of society, so the Satmars and the Gur and all kinds of extreme cults. So let's bring this in context. I'm really worried about people having a distorted view of Jewish life from this experience. And while it's important for her to tell the story, she should keep it in context.
Everyone can find a home where everyone can find freedom. It's the last bastion against oppression, if we shall be dramatic. And I feel as free here as I think I can possibly feel.
I don't get that. I mean, I would be afraid of Berlin to go in the underground and see like a neo-Nazi. I'd be like, I heard a person, he's from Poland, a Polish Jew, and he said that if somebody spat on him in the Berlin underground, and called him a dirty Jew. He really looks like, he has this curly hair. He doesn't have a yarmulke. He's not religious at all, but he just looks really like Semitic features, dark eyes, curls. He looks really Jewish, um, just like the way a stereotypical Jew. And somebody just spat on him and said anti-Semitic things to him. And I believe he's not. I think for a Jew to go to Germany, to Berlin, and have been treated like that, and I think there are quite a few cases. I think I would find it really difficult. As much as I'm really attracted to Berlin and all that, it's just the language as well. As much as I was exposed to German language, it's really hard for me sometimes to hear German and not have it go straight to the Holocaust. It's just associations we have. It's the history you cannot ignore. And I find it really odd. And while she thinks that Berlin is now where a lot of Israelis and liberal Jews go to, I don't think so. I think people still hesitate. I think there are a lot of people, but not as many as one thinks.
I'm still living in Germany, and because there are still neo-Nazis and
there's fear. There's an element
fear
of fear
there's
in your
fear
existence.
of the Nazis, right? There are Nazis here. I've met them, and there's also fear of the immigrants, because you have a lot of anti-Israel sentiment, and a lot of people cannot separate anti-Israel sentiment from anti-Jewish sentiment.
And nor should it. I mean, excuse me, what are we, chopped liver? What I really don't like is, they put us together with Israel. You know what? It's just an excuse. And when they target Jewish kosher markets, don't point the finger to Israel, because at least if you feel like being with Jews and not being targeted and being with the majority, you can always come here. What do you think? We're keeping this country open. Jews who want to come to Israel are assisted more than Jews like me that are born here. So I'm kind of feeling a little bit bitterness about her lack of solidarity.
Of course I'm frightened, and this is something about what it's like to be in Europe as a Jewish person.
So why doesn't she go from New York? She could go to San Francisco, to Oregon. There's so many beautiful places in America where she could live freely as a Jew, so much better than Berlin. I'm like really astonished from this story.
The shock, I think, coming from America to Europe, because American Jewish people take it completely for granted that they can be whoever they are, and nobody is actually going to even classify them.
Well, I don't know when this interview was, but I've heard that there are a lot of anti-Semitic, especially now the coronavirus going on, and just in general, in New York especially, so I don't know what she's talking about.
When I announced that I was Jewish in America, nobody put me in a Jewish box. They
absolutely do.
That there's good and bad everywhere, and that it's hard to generalize.
Too true. This is an important question. You've mentioned your grandmother, a very important figure in your life. The one thing I would like to tell her is
that she made me the person that I am, and that I could never have accomplished all the things that I've accomplished without her influence.
The next big challenge in my life is
learning how to let people in again.
I think she's had a tough life, but I think this TV series, it was really interesting. It's very realistic. It's very interesting, but please, anybody watches this, please remember this is an extreme minority. Just like I think if you make a film about the way extreme Muslims behave towards women, that doesn't mean the Muslims, like there's a movie, Not Without My Daughter, about Iran, an American who goes to Iran, and this husband starts controlling and doesn't want to let her out of the country, and they force extreme Islamic ideas on her. And we must not generalize, because there are also many more Muslims that are not extreme than they're the extreme. I believe that, because there's just so many Muslims that for them Islam is more like a cultural thing. It's more like a tradition. And even when it is a religion, it's not an oppressive religion, and they don't treat their women as less. Of course, there's the extremists, and quite a lot of them in that particular religion, but still, I believe that there are a lot of Muslims that should not be categorized with extremists. And when you see a movie about an extreme Muslim or terror or something, people generalize, and that's what they're going to do with this film as well. And I'm a little bit concerned about that, because it just came out, you know what I mean? And There's no sense in generalizing all Jews when you see this. I really sincerely cannot believe that Orthodox Jews behave even remotely close to this. But every close community is a pain in the butt. They monitor you, every close community, every little cult, and it is a cult. And I think it would be fair to write a warning and saying this does not portray um, typical, or it does not describe the life of Orthodox Jews. This is an extreme cult. So I think it would be important to for people to listen to the interview with Deborah Feldman and to research it. I know not everybody does that. I immediately researched. Like I wanted to know when I watched the Tiger King, I wanted to know the background. I was researching it. I was reading background because I'm the kind of person that I want to know where's the fact and where's the fiction. In the case of the Tiger King, it was documentary. This is not a documentary. This was they used actors, they reenacted all these things. And I heard, by the way, good news for the animal rights movement. um, Unfortunately, Satmar, they wear hats made out of mink. Somebody said 6 or 7 minks are used, or foxes are used to make these hats they wear on the Sabbath. And I'm so happy. It was very expensive, and they also, I guess, decided because of animal rights, the German staff, to use fake fur, and they made it look real. And I really applaud them for that. Thank you for not using mink and to reenact the hat, the special hats they have, because they dress like the way people dress in Poland or Ukraine or East Europe. They had these special hats. um, so it's really, really important to differentiate the various colors that make up the spectrum of Jewish life, and not to bunch everybody into one extreme category. And I think it was, she said in one point of the interview that she doesn't see any difference between extreme Hindu, Muslim, Christian, or Jews. Any form of extreme, rigid cult behavior is treats women really badly usually, and is very similar. So yeah. Anyway, it is a fascinating series, and I really do feel it's an interesting coming out story. It's a very, very interesting coming out story. And the actors, many of them are Israelis. I don't know, and they speak Yiddish. Um, I don't know. I just found that I didn't know Berlin was so beautiful. I thought it was like not that beautiful. I would think a lot before going there. It's always attracted me. I've never been to Berlin. My kids have been there. Always really attracted me. But when I looked at it, it just when I looked at Berlin, it just reminded me of German cities. A particular one city I've always visited, and just there's no imagination. They Things are very similar. They don't really use innovative architecture. Uh, if you see one city, it looks like the same. Um, I don't like that, the conservative side of Germany that builds the same. And also the language, and it's just the way a lot of people are just really not aware of the history, and they don't care. And the racism that still goes on there, it's just like, I mean, I would feel constantly challenged. I'm just not the kind of person who could shut myself uh, away from my environment. And if I hear that's the way when I lived in Europe, it's really hard for me to, it really affected me on a deep level. Even here, people bother me, but there's just so many nice Israeli people that you could talk to. There are people from all over the world. And where I live, racism is really not tolerated. And we try to maintain good relations with people that are not Jewish who live here, whether it's Arabs or African people that are not Jewish. And just there's so many such diversity because Israeli Jews come from all over the world. So it's just not like we don't have just one type of origin, like in that sect, Hungarian Jews we have here, um, people from Iraq and Yemen, and every in Poland and Hungary or wherever, and everybody brings their own food, unique culture, unique food, unique spices, unique things, and blends it in. And I just think it's just really special and unique, and especially when people are open. There's so many open-minded people here. It's just a pleasure. Sometimes I have bad experiences, and then I won't pass a day or two, and I'll have a really nice chat with somebody and really enjoy it. Especially, I'm a dog owner, and just dog owners are the best. And just sometimes I'll just talk to a mother or father with a baby, and because we have that in common. My kids are grown, but just little talks. People are so open, and it's so easy to talk to them. And although I find that the German people are relatively open to other European people that I've met, it's all a spectrum. They depends on where, but I heard Berlin's people are super communicative, super open, super tolerant. I still think it would be difficult for me to live in a place where people are really introvert and don't are not open and don't they have a lot of borders, they have a lot of fences, as Europeans tend to be. I mean, why was America founded? It was because people were tired of being oppressed by the European culture, being very oppressive and judgmental and not open. That's why people came to the New World, to Australia, to America, to Canada, to live as a more free society. So now it's funny that if she says people are going now back to Europe, I really don't think that trend is still there. Of course, Donald Trump is pushing people that way, but I still think America still is probably a more open society to discuss things. And I don't see that she had to go to Germany. It's just because her mother was there, but she really could have gone to other cities in America. And even in New York itself, she could have gone where Paul Auster lives. He doesn't live, oh, maybe he doesn't live in New York anymore. Maybe he lives in Connecticut. I don't know. I mean, I lived in New York as a child. I mean, there's so many, I never saw a religious Jew where I lived. I lived in Queens, and there were people from every ethnic origin in the world. If she had just gone to Queens and just like went to a women's shelter and say, I want to escape my oppressive husband, she would have gotten help. She wouldn't have needed to go to Germany, and she would have had help in getting an education. The social services would have helped her. There are centers for women that escape oppressive marriages, and I think even the Jews themselves have like social help. And she could have gone to a liberal community, and they would have helped her for sure. But of course, she would have been near the Satmars. She would have had maybe police protection. I don't know. I don't know how these people behave, but certainly the distance helped her. But going to Germany is a bit of an extreme. It looks to me like a provocation. It's like saying, after the Holocaust, this doesn't matter to me. And I can imagine that it looks really provocative, going from one extreme, from being people that are trying to rebuild the community after the Holocaust, to go to the place where the Holocaust actually started. Was like, where everything was, the final solution was decided and everything. So it's quite extreme, but it's an interesting place to be for sure. I like German people, but to be honest, it's challenging. It's hard for me to shut that. For me personally, it's hard for me to shut that voice that says, "Hey, these people were like, they were very different during the 30s." So anyway, everything you hear, take it please with a grain of salt. And it's really interesting if you get a chance to see how they made this film, the Netflix. The making, you should really watch the making of everybody that was involved in this, because they really,
And action!
it's really interesting.
It's mind blowing. I have to keep reminding myself.
It's like a historical movie, actually, what we're doing here.
Like,
It
this
really
is
looks,
90% of my filming experience here. It's like this.
To come over here to do a show set in Williamsburg, to do it in Berlin, it's kind of a...
wow, they filmed everything in Berlin.
It plays with my head.
A series in Yiddish, for me also personally, I think it's a great thing.
They may be dealing with a language that no one understands, and maybe dealing with
So this
Some
guy who
Yiddish.
plays the bad
For
guy
me,
with
also personally,
the
I think
cousin,
it's
he is actually from Satmar and he escaped them and he became an actor. So it's really interesting.
a great thing.
they may be dealing with a language that no one understands, and maybe dealing with customs
Okay.
and rituals that no one understands, but the essence of what's happening, that's universally understood.
This
She looks
very
very.
beautiful and unique story that shows kind of like both worlds. I don't think it's a story about the existence of God or something like that. It's more about the right to have your voice.
And people like me never really had that opportunity. We never saw ourselves reflected back in the stories being told in popular culture, so we didn't really know how to create our own stories.
I think this is the first show ever to accurately portray the Hasidic community.
I wouldn't say actually, no, extreme Hasidic community. The Satmars do not, in any shape or form, actually portray other movements. They're really extreme.
Real people, and their experiences are very universal and very relatable.
When the community watches it and there's somebody like me watching it and see that this girl lived exactly like she lives and she was able to muster the courage to follow her dreams, maybe this girl can too.
I don't think people are going to watch it from the Orthodox community. Ultra, they're not even allowed to have smartphones.
When I met Anna and Alexa and when I became friends with them, I realized that if anybody's ever going to be able to really grasp what this story is about and to really execute it in a way that is going to have a positive cultural impact, it's these women.
She's very different and always been told that she's very different because of the fact that she always also has these questions within her and she has that chutzpah, you can say.
Well, we have B'Shevi Zinger Yentl. Yentl said that too, It's always a person breaking the mold. So it's important.
The Satmar Jews are a Hasidic community originally from the town of Satmar in Hungary. They are mostly descendants of Holocaust survivors and started by Holocaust survivors in New York after the war. This kind of makes them a little bit different than a lot of other
Exactly.
Hasidic communities because they really developed what they were about after the war and not before.
It is founded by people